to deal with too. Y'all did a good job on your political cartoon worksheet yesterday. I did get them graded. I haven't gotten the grade. Once we get Canvas up and going, your grades will all be worked out. I know right now y'all got pretty much nothing as a grade, right? In Power School. Once we get Canvas up and going, you'll get an updated grade every week. Yes, sir.
They all schools you, but can I get the worksheets?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can give them to you.
Thank you so much.
All right, so particularly dealing with political machines, one of the things we deal with are political parties. And so here's a political cartoon here showing the party boss, and he's handing out things. All these people are reaching up and getting stuff. This will make sense once we actually figure out what a political machine is. All right, so we got problems that lead to political machines. One of the big problems, and we're going to talk about rapid urbanization kind of at the end of class today and kind of into tomorrow. But cities grow so fast, the government can't provide enough services for the people. Okay, that's essentially. You got to understand, during the Gilded Age, the cities were truly exploding in population. There were so many people moving in, immigrants moving in from other places, but you also had internal migration going on in our country, that the cities were just exploding because that's where the jobs were, right? Particularly in these industrial settings. We talked about industrialization yesterday. So you had all these people moving to get those jobs, and the cities were bursting at the seams, okay? So some of the problems facing transit, that's transportation, water, sewage, sanitation, protection. Not only that, but even housing is a problem, okay? Why would housing be a big problem for cities? Is because of rapid urbanization. Yes, sir. What?
Can't get open houses for
You can't build houses fast, okay? Houses did not get built as fast back then as they do today. You know, today they essentially, you figure 2.5 months, you go from dirt to a completed house. That's kind of the norm right now. Back then, building a house takes a lot longer, okay? Also, space ends up being, so you end up with some serious overcrowding, which causes problems too. And protection, there is actual protection from crime or protection from fire. We did have 2 major cities that burnt down during the Gilded Age. Chicago, that was in 1871, and then San Francisco burnt down too. And Chicago wasn't so much because of political machines, but we can blame political machines for a lot of the destruction of San Francisco. Even though it was a natural disaster, shoddy construction that people were able to get away with led to the destruction of the city. All right, so the solution, political machines step in and provide services in exchange for votes and money, okay? Is that corruption?
Yes.
Is it?
No, you're paying for a service.
Okay, so back then, the laws weren't real clear on what it was. Okay, the goal of the political machines was work to get their candidates elected and hold power. Okay, that was their complete goal. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to go. I thought I had one more. So the next thing, after you get this, we're literally going to define what a political machine is. Because some of y'all are actually thinking of like a piece of machinery, right? The political machine is more of an idea, okay? So get that on copy down, and we'll talk about it. Political machines really become more powerful as those cities become larger and larger and larger.
It is corruption. I think it's corruption.
You think it's corruption?
Yes.
At the time, it wasn't good.
But back then it ain't.
Yeah.
In 2021 it's corruption.
Yeah, back then, well, you got to understand, remember we're in laissez-faire. The government's not putting a lot of regulations, even on this kind of thing, okay? So while today we would say that's illegal, back then, is it ethical? So once you get that, we'll get this definition of a political machine. so there's the definition for political machine. It's a group of people. When we go into government, when you go into government next year, you will be learning about sort of theories of democracy. The political machine literally is the elite theory of democracy to a T. Basically, you got these people who have more influence on people and on the government, and they make the decisions of what the political party's going to do. Now, they have to provide things for the voters because any political party derives its power from the people who are voting for it, right? So the political machine, basically, they made sure they kept the people who were going to be voting for that party happy by providing jobs, in cities, one of the issues was housing. They might be able to find them a place to live, that not give it to them for free, but they might find an available apartment that they could rent, something like that. Okay, and we'll talk about how we're going to do a study on political machines beyond this unit. Next week, we're actually going to read a short little book in addition to our normal history studies. We're going to read The Plunkett of Tammany Hall. And later on, I'll show you actually on Schoology, I posted up a link. You can read this book for free online, or if you just need a paper copy to read, like I do, it's $5, Amazon Prime. It'll be on your porch on Monday if you order it today. But it's a good little book, and it'll help you understand how this whole system worked. Okay, but we're gonna read a couple of chapters a day and get through it next week. So, all right, is everybody done with this part? Everybody got the definition? All right, so basically this graphic just shows city governments. Remember, political machines exist on the city level, right? There's our cities, and the cities grow really, really quick. And the problem is the city government just can't take care of the people, okay? They're just kind of ineffective. The problem is it takes time to build water systems, sewer systems, and all that kind of stuff. And particularly, even back then, a lot of times when government's doing it, it takes even longer because they have to go through all these processes, and it's a little easier for individuals to get stuff done, okay? So the city government did provide jobs, financial aid, protection, sanitation, all that kind of stuff. But the political machine steps in and provided services and business help in exchange for votes and money, okay? The problem is the political machine mainly provided for the people who supported it, right? What if the Democratic political machine was in power in our city and you were a Republican?
So,
Okay. Now, granted, they might entice you to vote Democrat, right? They might say, you want this job? That kind of thing. So, any questions so far about the political machine? Okay, there's going to be a diagram that we're going to have here in just a second that you will need to put into your notes, okay? Is everybody good here on this? Everybody good? We got it? Okay. And this PowerPoint will be on Schoology too if you need it. All right, so political patronage. This is an important term, and I'll go ahead and tell you political patronage. You're probably going to have to define that on your test, okay? So you want to put a star by that one, okay? Essentially, that's when elected officials reward supporters by giving them a government job. Another name for it is the spoils system, okay? You may remember, I'm sure you studied Andrew Jackson back in 8th grade, and a lot of times the spoils system is credited to him because he did it a lot. He had a whole lot of supporters that weren't normal political types. He was the hero of the common man, and he rewarded those supporters by giving them jobs. And sometimes the problem with patronage is that jobs are given to somebody who's not qualified for it. A famous example from Andrew Jackson's era was he appointed, the jobs that he gave away was like postmaster of little towns because the president could appoint those jobs. The president can't appoint those jobs now, but back then he could. And so Andrew Jackson appointed his supporters to have these post office jobs. And there were multiple times where he appointed people who were illiterate to be the postmaster, which is a little bit of a problem. It's like, why do I keep getting the wrong mail? So, anyway. Or did they just dump it in the floor and say, there you go get it, dig around, find it? I don't know. So, all right, so this was the backbone of political party support. We've talked about how there was really high election turnouts. Like when we watched the video, it was like 79% of voters voted in 1896, which is a really high percentage compared to today, right? And so patronage was one of the reasons they were doing that. There was an incentive for them to vote, and not only, I mean, imagine if Andrew here had a patronage job and I had given him that job. Andrew's job depends on me getting reelected, doesn't it? So what's Andrew going to do? He's going to be the biggest campaigner. He's going to go out and get all his relatives to vote. He may even pay Matthew to vote like 5 times.
Period.
You see, but there's also a chance for corruption from that too. There was an incentive to get people to vote, but people like Andrew, who depended on me getting reelected for their job, he might break the law to ensure that I got reelected. Okay? So patronage led to much corruption. Spoilsmen, they didn't have to do their job well or even be qualified. They just had to make sure their party or candidate stayed in power. So that was pretty good as far as that. We'll talk in this. Then it talks about Plunkett at Tammany Hall. Obviously, you don't have to write that one down. Yes, question, David.
Okay, wait. Okay. Back then, did they use like the mail to vote?
No.
Oh, okay, no.
No, you had to go vote. In fact, you didn't have a secret ballot. You might, depending on what state or what city you were in, you literally might have had to go into the polls and declare, I cast my vote for so-and-so. Then somebody would mark it down. There was a lot of chance for corruption. And since there wasn't secret ballot, that's why, you could pay somebody and ensure they voted the right way. So, any questions about that so far? Any questions about patronage? Everybody feeling good about it? Okay. It does open a whole can of worms as far as political corruption goes, okay? So just be aware of that. All right? Everybody good? Good on the slide?
Yeah.
All in? Moving on. Okay. There we go. Just kidding. All right, so let's talk political machines. Again, that's that organized group. We already defined it. I like my definition a little bit better than the one I put in here. All right, so this is the diagram I was telling you about that you need to put in and label. Okay, at the pinnacle, that's the city boss. Okay, he calls the shots. Now, a lot of people think that the city boss, well, that's got to be who?
The guy's elected.
A lot of times you think, well, that's the elected official or that's the mayor. That is not always the case. Okay, the most infamous city boss in American history was a guy named Boss Tweed. His highest elected position was Superintendent of Education or Commissioner of Education for the city of New York. Okay, we actually had a political machine here in Memphis. It's called the Crump Machine, and it surrounded a guy named E.H. Crump, Boss Crump, and he served as mayor for a very, very short time. But then he just pulled the strings behind the scenes. So the boss, they don't even have to be an elected official, but they're the guy who decides who gets elected. All right? Then below that, we have what's called the ward boss, okay, or ward bosses. Cities are divided into wards. Like the city of South Haven is divided into 6 different wards. And the way our government in the city is set up, we have an alderman representing each ward. Some people call it a city council. We call it a board of aldermen. Okay. We also have one alderman that's elected at large. That means the whole city votes for him. He's essentially supposed to be the tiebreaker because you got 6 wards, so you got 3 and 3. You got 6. The alderman at large can be the tie-breaking vote if he needs to be. He's also considered the vice mayor. So if the mayor can't be there, he would act as the mayor. But the ward boss, these aren't elected officials. These are the people who find out what's going on in the wards. These are the ones that find out, okay, what actions do we need to take to get these people in the wards to vote for us? Okay. Now, each one of these levels, these lower levels, report into one of these others. Okay. Then we have what's called the precinct workers. Okay. A precinct, we're talking about a voting precinct. Okay. The precinct workers, these are the people who actually know the families that live in that voting precinct. They know who's on the voter roster there. They know how they normally vote. They know who's got a job, who doesn't have a job, who got fired. They know if a house fire happened, and they make sure that if a house fire happened, that family then receives some aid, whether it be clothing, a place to stay, something like that.
And then when they receive their aid, they vote for the.
Then they're like, oh my goodness, they cared enough.
Yeah.
And it's loyalty. Now, is that illegal, helping somebody like that?
No.
No, that's truly not illegal, okay? It's garnering loyalty. There's an old, it's a political maxim that a guy named Chris Matthews came up with, wrote a book called Hardball. It says, basically, what have you done for me lately? That's what voters ask these elected officials. So think about it. That brings in party loyalty. Now imagine you got these immigrants, these areas of the city. Think of just New York City, how many immigrants from different places. And immigrants, by the way, they tended to live in these ethnic neighborhoods. Why would an immigrant want to live around people from their country?
So it's not as discriminating.
Well, it eases up culture shock, right? You can feel comfortable. You can speak your language, practice the cultural, the festivals and all that kind of stuff. Also, probably have a common religion in those cultural groups. So it's just more comfortable. And that's why these cities, we always think of like Chinatown in New York City or out in San Francisco or Little Italy or something like that. Well, truly, all the major cities had these ethnic neighborhoods because we have a tendency to want to be around people who share our culture. It's just a human nature. It's a sociological fact. Okay, so you have these ethnic neighborhoods. Well, think about these immigrants coming into New York. What kind of things might the political machines be able to help them with as they're coming in?
Find housing, citizenship.
Find housing.
Jobs.
Get them into those ethnic neighborhoods. Working towards citizenship because you need that to be able to vote, right? Okay, helping them find jobs. What about like child care if the parents are having to work? I mean, there's all kinds of things that those political machines can help facilitate that's not illegal, but makes those people be loyal voters. You see what I'm saying? And that's what they did. And these precinct workers, they sort of had their finger on the pulse of that voting precinct. They knew what happened. In this book, it'll talk about it was almost like a carriage race if there was a death in the precinct. Because you got to understand, there was a Democratic political machine in New York, and there was a Republican one. And so it's like, which political machine can get there to offer condolences first? And this book is really, it's a good one because it breaks it down, and it's more like a conversation. It's not like reading a history book. So I hope y'all will enjoy that. All right. And then the foundation of any political organization is the voters. Okay. Now the voters in these large cities, these particularly large, eastern cities, increasingly during this time, more and more of them are going to be naturalized immigrants. Okay, so we see the political machines kind of cater to them. All right, so you do need to put this diagram in there. Okay, just you don't necessarily have to draw the little, notice we got our little ethnic groups in here, but you don't have to do that. Okay, just so you know what the labels are and know that the foundation is the voters, and that's of any political organization. It's the people who support it. That's where they derive their power. Did you have a question?
Oh, well, no, I won't say. So did you know that like in earlier, like the Jim Crow era, that like Jewish people immigrated within like African American neighborhoods and stuff?
Uh-huh.
And like they weren't necessarily allowed to live with like everybody else, and then they moved in with like the black people, and that was like a really common thing like in Memphis and in South. I did not know that. I just learned that.
And a lot of times the Jewish people ended up being like store owners and things like that. Like A. Schwab on Beale Street. There's a Jewish family that ran that store. I think they sold it, but that store's still there. Yeah. All right, so they all work together. Remember, their goal is to elect their candidates and have political power. Any political party, their goal is to get a candidate elected. That's what they do. And they ensure success of the machine. So there we go.
Batman in this.
All right, so let's talk about the city boss. He's the top man in the political machine. He got votes and money for a political party in return for providing services in favor. He controls city jobs, business licenses, and influences the court. Now remember, he's not necessarily an elected official. Yes.
So there are two political machines, one for each party.
Not always, but there can be. In New York, there was.
So like, did they fight?
It's
that-
not like the mob.
To me, like they should just.
It's
fight.
not like the mob. You got to understand. They were competing for influence.
This is good. I thought it was like the mob.
Well, I mean,
wish
it
was-
sounds it's because we automatically go
I
there.
wish it was more like.
And actually, a great movie that sort of shows the foundation, particularly of Tammany Hall, which was the big, infamous political machine. A great movie to watch about this is Gangs of New York, because Tammany Hall actually ends up being kind of run by the Irish people of Irish descent, who were those immigrants who faced that nativism. And it's really ironic because the Irish also then put nativism towards these new groups that are coming in, because they have to work harder to exert influence over it. It's a really, really interesting thing that went on during that time. And I've really, as I've gotten older, I've been more interested in studying the political machines and how they work. But of course, as I get older, I'm more interested in politics too. All right, so some examples. You got Roscoe Conkling. He was the boss of the New York Republican political
She
machine.
looks so familiar.
Okay. I don't know. He looks like random old guy from back in the day. Although he's got some kind of a
He's got the
distinctive.
flow in the back.
He's got the
and he's
distinctive
going bald.
flow, but the beard is common. Okay. Then you got William Tweed, who was the boss. He's the most infamous boss of the political machine. But like I said, in New York, they did have both. Chicago had both. And Chicago was actually the last major city to still retain a political machine. And that was almost up to the 1960s. Okay. Like I said, the Crump machine, that was more the 20s through the 50s in Memphis. Well, maybe the 40s. Crump Boulevard's named after E.H. Crump. Crump Stadium is named after E.H. Crump. Crump was instrumental in getting the old bridge built, because that was Crump Boulevard and it went across to West Memphis. His statue, if you've ever been to the zoo, you know you turn off Poplar to go into the zoo, and the Brooks Museum is right there. There's a statue of a guy doing this. That's a statue of E.H. Crump. So.
Oh, I wonder if that nigga Crump do that.
All right, so William Tweed, he's the most infamous. So Conkling, he's the Republican guy in New York, and Tweed. And Roscoe Conkling, he's going to end up being a U.S. Senator, okay? He started on the city level, but he rises up through the ranks, okay? Everybody good here? Any questions, concerns, fears? Everybody feeling warm and fuzzy about political machines?
Hold on, wait. Hold on.
Right, good?
Yeah.
Feeling it?
Yeah.
All right, so immigrants in the political machines. Yay. Constituents, anytime you say constituents, that's simply a voter in a certain area. A lot of times they report immigrants who have been naturalized. All right. The bosses and the captains often were the first or second generation immigrants themselves. Particularly Tweed. Tweed actually got his start. It's interesting. He was a fireman. And that's how he networked and became a political influencer that way. They knew the language, the culture, and what was needed. Basically, they knew their families had been through this, so they knew how to provide for those families that were coming in. Also, immigrants were taken advantage of, used to gain political strength sometimes. Okay, not always, but sometimes they were. It's a lot easier to manipulate someone who's afraid of things. Why?
Because
That's all they have to
they
lose.
have less to lose.
No,
Well, not they have, yeah, that.
Well, fear makes us do maybe irrational things.
Like you.
But particularly if you're afraid of not having having some security, you're going to turn to what appears to give you security. And the political machines knew how to sort of dial that in.
But poor people end up getting messed up the most when it comes to stuff like that, right? Because, like, say you've been gunning for the Republican person, and that person giving you all this stuff, and then the Democratic person wins, now you broke because it goes to the Republican person.
Well, under patronage, yes. I mean, there was a lot at stake for a lot of people under the patronage system, because what happens if the parties swapped power? Well, the Democrats come in, let's say the Republicans had control, the Democrats are going to come in and clean house and put their people in, right? And this was an ongoing thing, but it did make people a lot more politically active. Unfortunately, when patronage goes away, that's one of the downsides is now the people are less politically active, but those political parties still need to turn to somebody to get support, right? And it actually causes big business to gain more power in politics. And so it's a sort of at least in my opinion, I think that's a bad thing. I don't think we need to be dictated by businesses. I think we need to, the people need to take and use their voice. But that's just me. All right, everybody feeling good about this? Okay. Andrew, you good over there? Okay. Samaya, you all right? Okay. Awesome. So let's talk corruption, because truly, have you ever heard the saying that a few bad apples will spoil the whole bunch?
I was the apples.
Okay. Well, corruption in the machines. Obviously, in this time of laissez-faire, there's great opportunity for corruption at all levels of government, but in cities particularly, we end up with it. All right. You have fraud, cheating to win elections. Guess what? That's in the headlines today, isn't it? Now, we don't know, but I'll go ahead and tell you. A lot of times, at least in our state, in Mississippi, in certain areas of the state, there is fraud all the time in elections, still today. Voting more than once, or using pseudonames, or getting the dead people to vote. Once in New York, it was found that they were just filling up the voter rosters with all kinds of names, and horses and dogs were registered voters. I mean, and they voted every time for Democrats. It's weird. They voted for Tammany candidates. All right. Also, graft. Graft is another word that you need to know and will probably have to define on your test. Okay, graft is using political power for personal gain. How could I use political power for personal gain?
I can give you money.
You could pardon people.
I can get a free ticket to that basketball game.
Okay, and that's actually, ironically, y'all have all heard of Mike Espy, right?
Yes.
If you watch a YouTube video somewhere in Mississippi, anywhere in Mississippi, over the past 6 months, you have heard of Mike Espy.
Right for Mississippi.
Yes.
Talking about
Sidney Hyde Smith is wrong for Mississippi. Yes. All right. Well, Mike Espy, he actually lost his cabinet level position. He was forced to resign because of graft. He was the Secretary of Agriculture under Bill Clinton, and an agribusiness giant called Monsanto actually gave him tickets to the Super Bowl. Okay, and you're like, woo, yeah, he gets to go to the Super Bowl. Why is that not good,
It's
though?
a form of bribery.
It's like bribery, okay? Obviously, this agribusiness giant would like for the Secretary of Agriculture to be on their side, right?
Wow.
So they gave him tickets, which if he had said, oh, I can't accept those, it would have been fine, except he went to the Super Bowl.
That's why he's not very.
Well, he was as a representative, because he was in the U.S. House of Representatives, he was a pretty good representative. So,
Which one was the ad where it was like, somebody has made 52 bills and has not won a single one? Was that about the Sidney Hyde Smith one?
Yes.
I used to get so irritated. Like, I'm trying to listen to
I
this.
know, and it's like ad in 5,
No,
4.
it'd be an SB and then a Sidney Hyde Smith.
Yes, like
they
the
put them
next
together.
video. Like, they be.
Or sometimes she would be first and then him.
Yeah.
It was bad. Yeah. I'm glad that election is over.
So who won?
Cindy did. All right. Yes.
Wasn't there like a whole thing about like the governor or something?
Let's
Like
not get
he used it his like position to like make a drawaway for himself.
Yes. There was allegations that Tate Reeves built a road from his neighborhood to the mall.
He probably did.
Which that road did get built, but there was a lot made was that graph possibly?
Yeah,
Because, you
yeah.
know, I would want to shop at Dogwood Festival too. Anyway, bribes is another example. That's where businesses offer money to get city contracts. They usually pay out way more than the cost of the good or service. That time, oops, sorry. There's also something called a kickback, which is along the same lines. The way a kickback would work is that a company would bid on a contract, say to build a bridge or something like that, but they would overbid that price.
Oh,
So they
Okay.
would be like those people that like those scalpers and auctions. Like
A little bit like that, yes. Basically, they would overbid the contract. They knew that there was sort of an agreement that if that city councilman or whatever would make sure that even though that was a higher bid, that they would get that construction contract, some of that bid money would go into the pocket of that city councilman. Okay? Some big, like the Brooklyn Bridge, which is sort of a monument of this time period, was built that way. They actually looked the other way while they used substandard materials. We were just lucky that that bridge is over-engineered by a factor of 3. So even though they use substandard steel in the cables that hold the bridge up, we're okay.
Have they replaced it yet?
this whole
No.
country is just a pot of
All right.
corruption.
All right, so here's Boss Tweed. This is one of the most famous. This is a cartoon by one of the most famous political cartoonists in American history. His name was Thomas Nast. Boss Tweed actually offered the Times the editor of the Times, $1 million to fire Thomas Nast because the cartoons actually started turning public opinion against this man. It's a good likeness, isn't it? His name is William M. Tweed. Okay, this one's actually called The Brains of Tammany. Okay, so all right, he was the city boss of Tammany Hall. Now, this was in the 1860s that he was the boss of Tammany Hall in New York City. He led a ring of corrupt politicians who defrauded New York City. It's called the Tweed Ring, and they stole about $120 million from the city of New York
120 million back then.
in that amount.
That's about $1 billion.
Yeah,
Oh,
about
yeah.
that. Yeah. Let's see.
Is it under 60
Here you go,
million?
doing
It's
what?
like a
Doing
billion
math.
amount of cash.
I believe to convert it, it's about 60 million equals $1 billion.
So that's 2 billion.
Remember how we talked about Andrew Carnegie?
Jeez.
600 million is what he sold his company for.
So you gave away
So you
$10
gave
billion.
100 billion?
That's more than
I'm sorry.
Nah.
I ain't did math in so long. I mean,
Yes. It's a lot, isn't it? All right, so Boss Tweed. So let's talk about Tweed. Now, who's the cartoonist?
Nah.
Okay, Thomas Nast. N-A-S-T. You need to know who he is. He is the most famous cartoonist. Actually, he gave us a couple of beloved characters, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is not one of those beloved characters, but this is that's called the Brains of Tammany. So it's not very altruistic in thinking about the constituents, is it?
do we really have political cartoonists nowadays?
Yeah.
Yes. However, because newspapers are not really much of a thing. The political cartoonist, sadly, was one of the first jobs that they cut. And so you don't have as many as you once did, not as many prolific. There's a really good one based in Jackson. There's something called Mississippi Today, which is like a digital news source. Marshall Ramsey puts out a cartoon, I think every day, but he's pretty good.
Imagine the cartoons about like the old people we used to have. And, like,
Isn't that Dave's brother?
It's his cousin.
I knew it.
All right, everybody good
Damn
here?
it, Dave.
All right, so here's Boss Tweed. This is another famous one. Look at it. He's leaning and counting their strength. Well, who counts the votes?
The precinct workers.
The people elected, right? Which is the voter commission. The who controls the voter commission? The political party, the political machine that's in power. And here's the ballot. And we see him looking kind of angrily there. So he did receive large fees for interest. Those are kickbacks from the Erie Railroad. They milk the city with false leases, padded bills, false vouchers, unnecessary repairs, and overpriced goods. That kickback, that's a return of the portion of money received in a sale or contract. It's often illegal. The biggest thing they did was it was actually the new city hall for New York, which New York still uses this city hall, the one that was built back then. But that building, they ended up paying $16 million for that building in the 1860s. But the building actually should have only been worth about $5 million. All the rest was kickbacks.
Oh wow.
People was rich.
Well, not all people were rich, but you got to understand, New York was a very large city, so large amounts of money was moving around. Power corrupts, and the money, it was the draw.
I can't wait to corrupt our cities.
But this is another Nast cartoon. Note his signature. That's what it looks like. Thomas Nast. He's most famous for this topic, but he actually was a prolific cartoonist for years, and he produced on a lot of things. Some of his national stuff is good. He is actually the man who assigned the animal mascots for our political parties. For instance, if you see a donkey, what political party is that referred to?
Oh,
The Democrats.
the Democrat.
Okay, and the elephant is the Republicans. And
How did he come up with that?
okay, the elephant, part of it had to do with strength, but also there was a saying that elephants never forget. And it had to do with Republicans sort of holding a grudge after the Civil War. Okay, so that's where the Republican elephant came from. And well, the donkey was had to do with stubbornness of Democrats following the Civil War, but also it ties back to the Democratic Party was the party of Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson was kind of
Not that person.
donkey-like. So anyway, all right. Is everybody good on this slide with Boss Tweed?
Yeah.
All right, so the corruption at Tammany, the example was the courthouse, like we said. It cost a lot. It wasn't worth it. There it is. Yay. The Tweed stole, there's an estimation, they didn't keep good books. The Tweed ring was between 30 and 300 million. Most history books come in around $200 million. Okay, 30 million in 1868, that's enough. Okay. Eventually, he was indicted. He was charged with 120 counts of fraud and extortion. He only served a year in prison because he escaped.
He escaped prison.
He did.
Wait a minute. Hold on.
Wait, hold on.
Well, he was sent to prison in New York City.
120
Almost like
counts.
$200 million.
And he said, all right.
And well, who hired the police force and prison guards in New York City?
Oh,
Tammany Hall did.
And who had 30
There's a great Nast cartoon that is a picture of the jail. And on one end, people are pulling Boss Tweed out of the jail, and the other side, people are pushing him in. He escaped from prison. Imagine that. And he escaped and got on a steamship headed to Spain. He was just going to live out his life in Spain. Unfortunately for him, Thomas Nast wasn't done. When people would get on a ship to go to Europe, you're going to be on there for a week or two, sailing, particularly to Spain at that point. They would always buy, reading materials at the port when they were leaving. A lot like there's always a newsstand at the airport. If you've ever flown, you run into the Hudson News and grab a pack of gum and maybe a magazine or something, a Coke before you get on the plane. Well, when they docked in Spain, people when they were leaving the ship, they would discard these reading materials, right? So the customs guys were looking at people's papers and letting them into Spain, and people were discarding things. And one of them evidently grabbed a newspaper just to look at it, and had it laying on the table there. And Boss Tweed comes down the gangplank and is going through customs, and they're looking, and there's a Thomas Nast cartoon that depicts Boss Tweed. Okay, whoop-de-doo. They're like, ooh, celebrity, right? Except this cartoon, actually, Boss Tweed was wearing stripes. And he, basically there was a wall with words on it, and he had his cane and was pointing something like he was lecturing. There was like these little kids in the cartoon. Remember, his elected office was superintendent of education. Okay, so a New Yorker would get that, right? Okay, except the Spanish officials, they didn't read any of it because it was in English. They thought that this man was a kidnapper. So they arrested him and sent him back.
So he didn't even make it.
He ends up going to prison again, and he actually dies in prison very quickly after that. Like he has a heart attack or something, but he was a big old dude. So, but how do you think that Boss Tweed felt about Thomas Nast? Thomas Nast cartoons had turned public opinion and allowed those indictments to happen. And now, when he's escaped, he's home free. He's in Spain. A Nast cartoon gets him again.
For the wrong reason, too.
For the wrong reason. It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny.
So wait a minute.
Yes.
Oh,
What is this?
what was that? Hold on.
That was a Nast cartoon.
Okay.
What's
So,
questions right
I
there?
was just saying, so like, they was really pocketing $10 million off of stuff like that simply by just saying, "Hey, this is going to cost this," when really it really going to cost.
But
that.
it was a lot of it was done through contracts. The city council approved the contracts, but they were inflated, insanely inflated. But city council voted on them, and the population. You got to understand, the majority of the population in New York City at this time were poor, newer immigrants. They were working class. Did they have time to actually sit down, or could they sit down and read the figures and understand what was going on? Wow, that building cost that much money. No. They were busy. Most of them weren't reading. That's why the cartoons made the difference. When you're stuck in the checkout line at the grocery store, do you pick up the magazine and read the article?
No.
No, what do?
You look at the pictures.
You look at the pictures, and that's why the Inquirer and things like that always have the most outlandish things on the cover. So you'll actually look at it, it's like, wow, that's weird. Maybe I ought to buy that magazine. Well, think about it. These people, if they came in contact with a printed something, it was a glance, right? Or it's like, what made them pick that piece of paper up out of the gutter? And they understood it because they knew exactly what he looked like, because he did interact with the people. And this is one of the famous ones. Unfortunately, it's a little pixelated because it's a copy of a copy of a copy, but that's Boss Tweed up there. Okay? Being Caesar, this is called the Tammany Tiger on the Loose. And we see the tiger. It's tearing up the people. There's all these dead people. And basically, these are those candidates that went against Tammany Hall. But it invokes that Roman Colosseum, which these European immigrants would have a concept of that history. Right? Okay, Matthew, you got a question?
It's just can I use the restroom?
Oh, yeah. All right, so he was exposed by his corruption. I love this one where there are vultures. And there's all the bones. Like it's the treasury and the law, all these things in New York. New York's the fresh meat there. That's actually a body, not just the bones. The Tweed ring fell in 1873. Tweed was convicted of embezzlement. He was arrested on civil charge and jailed in New York City. This PowerPoint, I borrowed this slide from another one. They didn't tell the fun part of the story, is where he escapes and comes back. But that really happened. Okay? And like, if we lived at that time, we would recognize this guy, we'd recognize this guy, and this guy.
You all look the same.
Well, they're actually depicted similarly in different cartoons. Exactly, like I used to know his name. Well, I mean, when I was studying this more diligently, I knew these players. But he is like this is the Tweed ring. You got to understand that. There's another one called Who Stole the People's Money, and all these people are lined up and they're pointing at each other in a circle. Okay, everybody good here? Yes.
Are we gonna be able to see the thing that like got him caught?
I'll find it and show it to you. Yeah. All right. So political cartoonist, yeah, the most important one is Thomas Nast. And there's, we already said it, but just so you can get it in your notes. But like I said, Thomas Nast, he was very prolific. He gives us a couple of beloved figures, too.
Winnie the Pooh.
No,
Mickey Mouse.
he's not Walt Disney. Okay, Uncle Sam.
Oh.
Uncle Sam is a Nast.
I want you.
A Nast idea. Not that poster. That's from World War One. But the concept of Uncle Sam comes from Thomas Nast. Also, Thomas Nast gives us the modern view of Santa Claus.
The fat chubby dude. The bird.
Because actually, if you read the various stories of Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas was actually a thin guy, and Father Christmas was more jolly, but he wore a green suit and all of these things. And essentially, Thomas Nast creates the image of Santa Claus that then is written in the poem The Night Before Christmas, and then that's what our image of Santa Claus is. The jolly guy with the rosy cheeks, and Nast actually drew images like that, and that's what influenced it. So next Christmas, when the Santa Claus decorations start to come out, you think Thomas Nast.
Thomas Nast.
All right, this is one of my favorites. Okay, what symbolism do we see here?
You're under the thumb.
Okay, being under the thumb. Do y'all know that? Do y'all know that idea? Being under the thumb. That means somebody's controlling you. You're probably under your parents' thumb, right?
That's a giant thumb.
That is a giant thumb, and when you see that it's New York City, which is pretty big, and look, Jersey's over here like, woo, we're okay. But you see the labels here. This makes Jersey look a lot better, even though it smells funny.
People do too.
All right, but it definitely tells us exactly whose thumb it's under, too, from the cufflinks. Okay, that's another, like I said, very, very famous Thomas Nast, and there's Thomas Nast. All right, so we already talked about patronage and the spoils system. Let's just go. Government jobs are the spoils.
Jobs for the homies. The homies.
All right. So again, that's back to Andrew Jackson, which that's where that spoil system comes from. We already talked about that, so we'll move on from that. Basically, it was replaced with something called civil service. Okay?
What's civil service?
Civil service. We're about to talk about civil service.
Oh my God. So Andrew Jackson was basically just like the people who be like, my cousin work at the Pentagon. They cousins actually work at the Pentagon.
Patronage, I mean, you might say it was the foundation of American politics for a long, long time. But civil service comes about due to an assassination.
Who died?
The president.
Which one?
We actually had several.
McKinley.
Was it James A. Garfield?
It was Garfield.
I knew it.
You're so smart. I know that's right.
Matthew has actually been to James A. Garfield's house.
Of course you
He
did.
had a house?
Yeah. No, dude. It wasn't the.
Well, my family, and on our vacations, we always work history into it, if you can imagine that.
Ooh.
He's also been to William McKinley's house.
Yep.
I've been to Thomas Jefferson.
I sat on his front
Yeah, I've
porch.
been to Jefferson and Washington. So.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's where I have.
I've been there. So, but guys, like, yes, Connor.
Didn't Andrew Jackson
That's it.
fire his whole staff? Would that be like civil service? Or
Oh, he almost
Did he
got
what?
assassinated,
What'd you say?
too.
Didn't Andrew
Oh, yeah.
Jackson fire his whole like
That's
staff?
the
Like
With it
everything?
hanging.
And it's like
They actually all resigned.
yeah.
It's called the Peggy Eaton Affair. All but one resigned.
Yeah.
And Martin Van Buren ends up being the next vice president because of loyalty.
Oh,
So it's almost like some.
The,
Yeah, Andrew Jackson. That's an interesting time to study.
he bumped somebody in the head with a cane, didn't he?
Well, Andrew Jackson was the first attempted assassination of the president. He was in the Capitol. A guy pulled out a pistol. The pistol misfired. Andrew Jackson beat up the guy with his cane. So that's kind of that's the kind of president I want. You know, that not all the cultural stuff that Andrew Jackson had going on, but one that kicks butt and takes names like that. All right, so let's talk about how patronage ended. Something was brought about called the Pendleton Civil Service Act. The Pendleton Civil Service Act becomes a thing because our president gets assassinated. Okay? This law was passed by Congress. Basically what the Pendleton Act does is it requires you to take a government exam to be able to make sure that you are eligible to work or job. I don't have any tissue. You can go to the restroom.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Daily
You got something on your head.
All right, so people have to pass the civil service exam, and when we read Plunkett at Tammany Hall, he's going to talk a lot about that. The Pendleton Act only applied to the federal government to start with, and it only applied to about 10% of jobs to start, but after that it's going to expand. Okay, so the Pendleton Act, very, very important, and it's tied to the assassination of James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield was killed by a deranged man who believed he had helped the campaign enough to get a job. He did not get a job. So, in his anger, he killed the president.
On a trade platform.
Because the president actually wanted to, he was what we called, he was kind of a reformer. His vice president was a stalwart, somebody who did not want to change patronage. And he literally said, a stalwart is now the president is dead, a stalwart is now president. And that was Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur, who liked patronage, he supported this bill because he didn't want to potentially get shot. James A. Garfield was not the only assassination due to patronage during this time period. A mayor of Chicago was assassinated for exactly the same thing in the 1890s. But Garfield was assassinated in 1881. He had won the election of 1880. Sadly, he's one of our shortest serving presidents because he died. Chester A. Arthur is not going to run again, but he became a reformer, and patronage played a large role in that. But the Pendleton Civil Service Act, this is